what happens in a world where AI has replaced most of the jobs? What happens in that scenario?
Like if you look at IMF, up to 40% of the jobs today are at risk of being replaced by AI. Elon Musk has famously called waking up AGI, it's like summoning the demon. Stephen Hawking, the smartest man on earth, said similar things. Even the brightest minds on earth can't tell you what would be its goals, its ambitions, its actions.
So Akshay Chopra is an innovation leader, venture builder, investor, and a futurist.
You need to use AI as a gym and not as a wheelchair. If you don't use AI enough, you're doing a disservice to yourself. If you're using AI too much, you're doing yourself a massive disservice as well.
Okay. So, yeah, hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of M Square Podcast. Today we have a very special guest and a very unique topic, and a topic, that I have been looking forward to discuss with somebody, and I think that day is finally here. So, we have today with us Mr. Akshay Chopra. Uh, Akshay, welcome to the show. Thank you so much
Thank you,
for
Anurag.
giving
Thank
us
you
your
for having
time.
me.
Yeah. So if I start and I want to give a little brief about Akshay, like he's a renowned veteran in this field, and he's coming up with a very unique book called After Us, which we'll be discussing about more in the episode. So Akshay Chopra is an innovation leader, venture builder, investor, and a futurist who has been featured in tier one media globally. Akshay holds 8 patents, and his executive roles include founder of 237 Ventures, president at Genius XYZ, and formerly VP and Head of Innovation at Visa CEMEA, and Southeast Asia leader of Deloitte Greenhouse. He also serves on boards and advisory boards of organizations such as MENA FinTech Association, UAE's Government's New Economy Academy, Rishihood University, and multiple fintechs. So Akshay has been widely featured in tier one media, including CNN, CNBC, Harvard Business Review, TechCrunch, Arabian Business, and he has a unique ability to translate complex technology into accessible transformative ideas. And he's holds an MBA from the Indian School of Business and BA honors in economics from the Delhi University. So Akshay, welcome to the show. An absolute honor to have you with us today, and really looking forward to the kind of discussion we were looking forward to have with you.
Likewise, Anurag. Thank you for having me, and it's an honor to be here.
Yeah. So, Akshay, before we delve into the world of AI and, fintech, I wanted to understand from you, how did it all start for you? Like as a kid, how you were, like, were you always curious about the new technology coming in, and how did it all start for you?
And rightly as you've said, Anurag, I think it's really important to build that curiosity at the childhood stage. And I always look back to one moment where my mother narrated to me a science fiction short story by Ray Bradbury called the Clap of Thunder, and
Okay.
it basically it's the butterfly effect, time travel, etc. And I couldn't even read back then, but she read it out to me, and that just caused some neurons in my brain to fire off like never before, and just opened me up to so many possibilities. So yes, I would say like the seeds of my curiosity of wanting to write and explore in the speculative fiction domain were planted very early on. And as a parent, but also as someone who encourages critical thinking, I think it's really important to build that skill with children.
Okay. And I think, like that you mentioned that how as kids, when we come across certain things, like when your parents tell us some stories, or when we come across some topics that stay with us, for a very, very long time. And it has been the case with me also, when my parents would tell me something, I would always want to know more. And, like at back then, we didn't have internet as we have now. So, we were limited to the information our parents gave us. So, Akshay, like, being that inquisitive child, how was it now since you have been in both the eras, before internet, post internet, and now in the AI era? So, how have you, like, seen all of it evolve, and like, what is your take on that?
I feel like the curiosity is a fundamental trait, but the ability to lean into curiosity and develop as a person, it went through a bit of a curve. Initially, like in say pre-90s and 90s,
Hmm.
if you were a curious person, you would have had to go and read books and figure stuff out and learn about that. So it was a little harder, in the very analog way. Then late 90s, 2000 onwards, if you were a curious person, you could really master a subject thanks to the internet. I mean, the entire human knowledge was available at your fingertips. And, one would think that now with AI, it's actually going to become even easier. But I actually feel like the risk is probably that things will be inimical to us. So, Now, I feel like when you're curious, you just ask your chatbot something and it gives you an answer. You don't vet it. You don't ask, from different perspectives. You don't challenge yourself and your source of information. So I actually worry that if people go straight to their chatbots and to AI and just don't have that critical thinking, it will actually lead to cognitive atrophy, meaning
Mm.
their problem solving skills, their reasoning skills will actually get worse. So as I said, initially it was a little hard to feed your curiosity, then became a lot easier. And now in the 2020s, I feel it's actually going to become a little hard again because it's too easy because you got a lot of information, but you're not developing that muscle unless you're really deliberate about it.
Okay. And that is a very important point that you mentioned that, that cognitive ability is going to diminish. So, s- now it, actually sparks a question in me as my cognitive ability is going to diminish using as I am go on using more and more AI. And, so how do I ensure that that does not happen? Because as a human, it's always a tendency to, get the answer in the quickest possible manner. And with all the advent of social media, that ability to actually be patient in gathering that information, going to different sources was already diminished. And with AI, it has become as easy as scrolling an Instagram for me to, get the information at the, at the behest of anything. Because, and if in, especially in India where everything is free now, you can get Perplexity for a year, you can get Gemini, you can get ChatGPT for a year for free, absolutely free. I think, so how do you see the next generation of students and even workers, like somebody who is a corporate employee, and we have been pushed to, use more and more of Copilot, and because, that is what they're using. In the long run, it diminishes my ability to think critically. When and as and when, say, suppose I gather 8 to 10 years of experience, and now I'm expected to be an expert, and I'm only an expert in using the Copilot in a better way. And Copilot does not have a resolution because we have not faced that problem ever in the company's history. So how do you see that panning out, and how as a student or as an employee I can actually mitigate that? I know it's going to be very difficult to mitigate it, but how would you do it?
That's a great question. And to me, the simplest analogy I've found, and I love this one, it says you need to use AI as a gym and not as a wheelchair.
Okay.
If you don't use AI enough, you're doing a disservice to yourself. If you're using AI too much and basically outsourcing your entire thought process to AI, you're doing yourself a massive disservice as well. The perfect balance is somewhere in the middle. And I'll give you this example. There was a research done a couple of years back where they got a bunch of really smart management consultants from one of the big three, MBB
Yes.
firms, and they did a study on who performs the best depending on which usage level of AI. What they found was that the guys who didn't use AI at all, their outputs were not the greatest. Also, those who entirely used AI, who were just like, we're going to ask it all this question and just simply replicate its answers, they also fared pretty poorly. The right ones were where they used AI as a tool, but not completely depending on it. So they used
Okay.
it for some research, for automation of certain mundane tasks, but they ultimately held the intellectual authority. They vetted its answers, made sure there was no hallucination, sanity checked it, repeatedly asked the questions. And so where it was used as a tool, it was used, the outputs were the best. And so that was one example where, how are your outputs the best is when you use it as a tool, but not as either outsourced everything, neither as I'm not going to touch it. But in general, for your own cognitive health, for your own ability to grow as a person, you need to follow the same process. You got to use AI. So the answer here is not don't use AI. You got to use it, but you got to set guardrails for yourself, saying that I'm not going to blindly trust whatever it says. I'm not going to simply replicate whatever I get from my chatbot, but I'm going to ask it a lot of questions. I'm going to apply my own critical thinking, and I am the umpire in this situation. If you do that, then I think you can really supercharge yourself professionally in terms of your own brain development. If you don't do that, you will get outmoded very soon. You will get
Mhm.
replaced by someone who uses it in the right way rather than that. And most concerningly, you might face cognitive decline because you have kind of weakened that muscle that allows you to think
Yeah.
critically through to solve problems. And I think, especially for the younger generation, that is a very, very big concern. Because look, folks like you and I, Anurag, we have had years of looking at textbooks and notebooks and
Yeah.
solving problems and painfully Googling and looking at page 10 of Google to garner
Yeah.
and assess information. But this latest generation, they have never even built that muscle of problem solving, of coming to their own conclusions. So I think as a parent, but generally as someone who's in charge of my own brain as well, I want to keep things sharp and I want to build that muscle and exercise it. Use your brain. I use AI as a gym.
That's really wonderful, like use AI as a gym. Because I've seen that in my vicinity also where people are like, I can do it better when I'm not using AI. And there are
Mhm.
people who are, me being one of them who uses AI to a large extent, to do my daily tasks, even at office or at home, like it has become a very crucial point of my everyday work into an extent where yesterday only I was discussing it with my brother, like what I don't know how many subscriptions I'll be using after a year because now I am, hooked on to using ChatGPT for copywriting, Perplexity I use for research, and Gemini for creating infographics using Notebook LM. And like there is a huge dependency now because they're doing great work, which would take me hours to do it. So I think getting used to them and being totally dependent on it is going to be a tough task to get out of. But I really like that
Yeah.
using AI as
And
a gym.
I'll give you some concrete risks of total dependence as
Yeah.
well, Anurag. Because a lot of us are, unless we check ourselves now, we're going to be heading into that direction. It is not a good place to be. So, and even I, as an author, I wrote a book, as an AI investor about AI.
Hmm.
So I get to ask this question: did you use AI? And the answer is very, very little, and certainly not for writing. I used it for research. I use it for certain validation, and I'll give you a few reasons why. Right? Firstly, AI hallucinates like crazy, even now. Meaning, it will come up with wrong answers, wrong explanations, wrong advice, and it will put forth that answer in a very compelling, very confident manner. And you will feel that, okay, now this is put forward so well, it should be right, but it's probably wrong. And you have to use your mind and check for these hallucinations. So you could actually end up, putting information out there or making decisions based on information that is just completely wrong, hallucinatory. But you thought it was right because your AI put it forward so cleanly, and it usually does a good job. So hallucination is one risk. Secondly, as a creator, your ideas won't be original for very long if you keep feeding them to your AI.
Okay.
I'll give you an example. About 3 years ago, there was a Samsung engineer was using ChatGPT, and he put some of their source code, the Samsung source code
Okay.
that really helps drive their chips into ChatGPT. This was the first time in the history of this conglomerate that someone had put this top secret formula on
On
third
yeah,
parties.
third party.
And so two things happened. One, Samsung immediately banned ChatGPT across the board, and many companies followed suit back then. But also now that source code was used to train ChatGPT's own model. So now tomorrow, if I ask for something, it has also been trained on and might even be using
Yeah.
that Samsung source code. So your originality may no longer be original. And as an author, as a creator, I am very careful not to put any of my original ideas there, just because I don't want it to be, using them and giving them freely to other people. I don't want to train it on my ideas until they are already copyrighted and in public domain. And the last thing I'll say is that, look, any authority, like whether it's your publisher, whether it's your university, whether it's your clients, they either have great tools that can already tell whether something is AI generated, or they are building that sanity check intuitively, that they know when something is AI
Yeah.
assisted or generated. That could also be a bit of a credibility thing, especially if you're a creator that oh yeah, this guy just uses AI, so
Yeah.
ignore what he does. So, and these are just a few of the reasons, right? And then there's of course so many more risks to just oversharing with AI and putting stuff you are not supposed to. But again, use it for research, use it as a tool. The biggest disservice you can do is if you don't use AI, but just know when to stop and don't build dependence to use your words.
Agreed to it. And I think, like that very nice point you mentioned about Samsung, same happened with Deloitte, right? Where their AI generated reports were given to, I think, Australian government, and, they had to pay it back whatever money they were charging for consultancy. And I think that is what happens when
Great
we just
example.
become, yeah, we just become over reliant on, just using AI and no human intervention being in place. And I really like the point that you also mentioned that, that you will not be replaced by AI, but obviously by someone who uses AI better than you. And I think that has been the narrative that has been going around in the market. Akshay, but one more thing I want to ask that, as you mentioned that, as a creator, having your uniqueness in your content, and since you are an author also, but there are multiple creators in India, like, like Web of Society, Varun Maya being some of them, who are into, 95% content creation is through AI. They have systems in place that fetches the topics, creates their video through Hey and use 11 Labs for their audio. And I think 90% of the audience still cannot make out, if it's AI or if it's actually them creating those videos at that scale. So, like, do you like, and since you have been investing in AI companies, do you feel that AI helps you scale at a pace that, especially for companies that are trying to build on organic content, even if not organic UGC content, that it helps them, scale at a pace that is not humanly possible, like, when I say humanly possible, just not possible through, only creating content when a human being is involved. Because if I have to do it, I have to dedicate 8 to 10 hours a day for recording that much content, right? But whereas with HeyGen and 11 Labs, it's I am not even required once I train the model.
Yeah, look, I think ultimately you do need a human touch. And Vaibhav Sisanidhi, for example, I've seen his work as well, and and I love the fact that he's very open about how he uses AI. And but ultimately AI helps him research, helps him validate what's
Mm,
going to get the views, but ultimately the decisions are his, right? So and his teams. So I think if you put it on complete autopilot and just let AI do all the work, all the decision making, etc., it'll devolve into slop very, very quickly. Also, if you are competing with, forget creators, like if you're competing with people who are using AI and you're not using AI at all, you will price
yeah.
yourself out of the market.
Yes.
You just won't be able to compete with them. So again, it's a matter of balance. Like I think, and this is where things are going to go in general. I don't think humans are entirely going to be replaced anytime soon, but the level of human intervention required is definitely going to go down considerably. And Anurag, honestly, if I were to add a slightly more, maybe it's pessimistic, but I think it's realistic touch to that, AI won't replace you, but people using AI will replace you. It'll be as thus. People using AI will definitely replace you.
Yeah.
But I do think for many, many, many jobs and professions, AI will also replace you. And this is not just my opinion of one. Like if you look at IMF, for example, they are saying that up to 40% of the jobs today, not in the future, today, are at risk of being replaced by AI. 60% in developed countries, right? So this
Okay.
is a very real possibility that no matter how good you are, and you can support yourself by learning all these tools, upskilling, and trying to reinvent yourself. But there is a very real risk that you might be in that 40%. So it is, I think, naive to assume that I can always stay employed in the way that I am today. I just need to reskill. There's a lot that is at work right now, and the pace of change is incredible.
Yeah. And I think, like when you mentioned me, since I worked as a solution architect, and we have been asked more and more to use AI, and I realized that after a point, maybe 2 3 years down the line, when these companies can have their own models, which is in-house trained and is hosted on their local servers. That job becomes redundant. There will only be one person who will be required to create these, proposals that we create, and it can be done within 10 minutes. Just you feed the customer requirements, get the proposal out, and that's it. Solution architects will not be required at the scale as they're required right now. So, Akshay, I wanted to ask, what happens in a world, where there are, where AI has replaced most of the jobs. Obviously, the population is so big that you cannot offer everybody a job. What happens in that scenario? I mean, like, even
Yeah.
because at after a point, learning AI also won't be enough. So, does everyone create an AI company and ask you to
This is
invest
a
in them?
great question and a very nuanced one, right? And it goes kind of longitudinally over time. So look, so to the last comment you made that learning AI is also sometimes not enough. There is this powerful saying that AI has a tendency to eat its own.
Okay.
Meaning, earlier we were sold the narrative that, oh, AI is going to create all these new jobs and these new industries. It's not going to replace us. Well, 2 years later, even those newly created jobs and industries can be
Yeah.
made redundant. And I'll give you a very concrete example. If you remember, like 2 or 3 years ago, there was this whole thing about prompt engineering. That prompt engineering is the hottest new skill, and
Yes.
people, spent their lives, kind of pivoted their entire careers towards prompt engineering. But we're already at a point where you don't need to engineer your prompts. Like AI has gotten so smart that even with the most layman prompts, you can vibe code, you can, basically get whatever you want
Yeah.
without having to really over engineer your prompt. So AI created that job market and ate it up in just a couple of years.
Yes.
So, I think you have to be aware of these fads and not think that, okay, it's going to be like the internet boom where it's going to create these jobs and they'll be secure for the next 20 years. That's one. Secondly, I think you have to expose yourself to AI. You have to learn AI with the guardrails that we talked about of not having over dependence. That's absolutely critical. So no matter what happens, if you want to stay relevant, you need to know how to use and expand your productivity, creativity, whatever it is, using AI. Third, I do think that there are a lot of job categories that will stand the test of time. Product management, for example,
Okay.
people will still need products. People will still, want to see evolution. And I think the product manager role is probably still going to persist for a while. P&L roles as well. Like ultimately shareholders want to see business leaders managing profit and loss, managing, accountable for revenues and costs, and not a bot necessarily. So
Yeah.
again, this might change in 5 years,
Yes.
but I feel like especially product management, P&L roles have a large sticking power. And talking about product management, for example, right, Anurag, like now as a product manager, if I have a concept, a feature that I want to build, I can go over to Chat GPT or any of the Gemini toolkits and very quickly get a prototype of what those screens would look
Yes.
like. I've got a bunch of tools that will help me create a prototype, a working prototype of what that will look like in terms of the front end, the code, and then the early iterations of front end UX code. All of that I can completely automatically do very, very quickly on my own.
Yeah.
And where I would have to involve engineers is now right at the end when I know what I want. I've tested it with users, and now I need to commit it into code. So I think there are certain roles, like especially ones that have fiduciary responsibilities or P&L responsibilities, product management. I think those will stay persistent for a while. But now, then you said, like if you take it out really into the future, what those things look like, then that's where it gets really interesting, right? Because all the goalposts we are putting for AI in terms of what it cannot do, it blows past them in 2 years.
Yes.
Oh, AI can't be creative, blown past it in a couple of years. Oh, AI can't empathize with us. Well, at least it appears to, because millions of people around the world are using it for therapy.
Yeah.
And AI can't replace doctors. Guess what? It can actually do a better diagnosis than many human doctors. So you can't really, even these few examples I gave, nothing is secure in my
Yeah.
opinion. Like it's an exponential rate of improvement. What we think is never going to be possible might actually get possible. So what if we fast forward into a world where companies don't need human workers at all, right? Where you have or just a handful of human workers, but companies are doing great business with each other with their AI agents working for each other. Then what do people do? What do their source of income looks like? Well, I've read some compelling theories on this topic, and one of the ways of looking at it is even if companies don't need employees, they need, in a capitalist system, they need consumers, right? So they still need people to buy their products and services, even if they don't have employees. But if those people are not earning a salary, then where does that money come from? So a lot of sociologists, economists, etc., believe that we are headed towards a era of universal basic income.
Okay.
Meaning that those governments are making so much money and companies are making so much money with so much more efficient working without having to depend on human limitations, and so they actually channel a little bit of that money back to, the workers, to the consumers, to the to people as a dividend, like or just income for existing, kind of like a reverse of taxes.
Got it.
And that's money you get, and then you can use that to spend to fuel the economy, and then the multiplier effect of economics takes over from there.
Got it.
But then what happens in a country like India, right? Like, do you actually expect the Indian government to pay 1.4 billion people a universal income?
Yeah.
That's tough. And by the way, we've seen examples of this happening in US and Singapore and a few other places during COVID, where the governments actually paid everyone money just to keep the economy alive, to keep people afoot. But what about in a place like India? So I honestly believe, especially in large, emerging economies like ours, we will want to see more of the private sector play a role. So what I will call a universal basic dividend,
Okay.
meaning that the companies are making a lot of money. They're making it without having to employ nearly as many people. They're making money at much greater rates because innovation is happening
Mm-hmm.
so fast. Business is happening so fast with so much more efficiency with AI agents. So they actually then feed money back to people as a universal basic dividend combined with whatever universal basic income that the government gives. So, these are just some of the things that the economists are talking about around the world. But there will, it's quite fathomable that there might be a time, unless the government step in, that we don't actually need to be employed, and companies don't need a lot of human employees.
Got it. And I think that is very, scary from India's perspective, because a large part of India's evolution in terms of, spending power came from its IT industry, and which is entirely based on labor arbitrage, because it's easier and cheaper to, get an employee in India working out than to have them in a developed country like a US or a UK. And since the coding industry is going to be one of the hardest hit, I won't say, it's be totally wiped out, because still we expected that the entire vibe coding community will be, strong up in 2020 by the end of 2025. It's still not there. It's taking more time. But, eventually it will get there, and they will be the hardest hit, because the amount of coders, the bench strength that is required will no longer be required. And for those employees to find a new job, and especially for people who are in the middle management, at the age of 35, 40, to restart the career, to learn new things, becomes a lot tougher than for people who are just, coming up into the industry. And what you mentioned, I think, it's a very unique topic that I have not heard of before. And I think it's going to be a time to look forward to, and how the government responds to it, when you actually start losing jobs at that scale, uh, at which you cannot replenish them that faster, because AI will consume jobs faster than, it will create. I think I was also of that view that, like how internet was, like people were scared in 1991 and 1992s of it was going to take a lot of jobs, but instead it created more jobs. But I think, we feel the same, that AI will do the same, but it's not that, like it's a little more scarier than. And still, I think in India, and not sure about around the world, but when I talk to my colleagues or when I talk to my friends, they seem to be very okay with, AI, that okay, they can do this. Still, for them, it's AI is ChatGPT, Perplexity, or no, now Gemini maybe. Like the extent of which it is getting, like companies have started using it, and I see it with, myself, and I think it's quite scary, because, like I have a few friends who work in the education industry, and I have seen how their sales team is now replaced by 80% through all sales IQ agents. Like it's all done through agents, and the calls are handled through voice agents and all. And it's quite scary. I used to feel that, sales as a role is going to be there, but not in the same quantum as it is required now. And I think that is
Mm.
very well put out by you.
What you're saying about some people are being very relaxed about it is a very real problem, and it's called AI denialism. You talk to a group of 10 people and tell them that we'll talk about AI, general conversation.
Hmm.
At least a few of them will say, yeah, but AI can never do this, it can never do
Yeah.
that, it can never do X as well as people. And they're in denial. And even though every couple of years it blows past all those limitations. So I read a very interesting perspective where people believe that AI denialism, which is very prevalent these days, is actually not coming from a place of ego, it's coming from a place of grief. Meaning, specifically, this is the first time in the history of us humans as a species that we've had a rival intelligence. Right now, it's at parity or a little lower. You can say, I mean, not at parity, but it's threatening many people. And for the first time, we've seen this, and now this is kind of humanity's collective consciousness mourning the loss of our status as Earth's
Wow,
most
great.
intelligent species. And for mourning, for grief, one of the main stages of grief is actually denial. Right. So many people, they see that coming. They intuitively know that, no, you know what, things are never going to be the same. But their grief response is denial. So I found that a very interesting perspective. But while denial is fine, it's healthy, it's normal, a part of moving on. It is dangerous because those friends of ours who you just mentioned, who are in denial, who never think that they can be challenged by AI, they're not protecting themselves from the risks, nor are they really taking the responsibility or the opportunities head on. So denial prevents you from catering to the risks and the opportunities that AI brings.
Yeah.
So to me, is just something that you should not fall into that trap. But to your point about okay, what happens really, right? Like if these things continue, like in the coding community, like we're seeing the pendulum swing. Right now, you've seen major companies, they fired a lot of people in the coding sector to get because of vibe coding, and now many of them are starting to hire them back,
Yeah.
including some big names in tech. You've seen the news in the last couple of years. So but you have to reskill, you have to adapt. If you were to ask me what are some of the most promising industries and like skill sets that will be relevant in the post artificial general intelligence era, meaning when AI can do everything as well as humans or even better. And I've actually captured some of this in my book, and this is an personal opinion. But I think three areas where AI will still need humanity or still require humanity to play a big role, in my opinion, are thus: restoration, preservation, and exploration. And as an investor, I'm putting my money behind these as well. Restoration means that, look, and I'm a Delhiite, right? So already our biosphere is at a place where it's just not sustainable. And if something comes out that's more intelligent than us, I think the first thing it'll help us do is, let's bring your planet back to habitability, back to sustainability. So restoration of the planet, I think, is a major thing which AI will, and humans will still have a major role to play in. And I think it'll be a massive, massive industry, even if everything else is automated. And humans will have to play a role there. Second is preservation. So even though human knowledge, human outputs, creativity might not be as good as an AI's, they are still human. They are still very much us. And I think the arts, the creative industries will still continue to persist and still continue to thrive because they are a shining beacon of humanity's output in a completely automated world. So I actually believe that the creative industries will still continue to shine. And to the question you were asking me, if all content is AI generated, I still think there will always be a market for human generated content because it is ours. So restoration, preservation, and the last is exploration. I mean, you're already hearing, there are plans in the next 10 years to launch, spaceships to Mars, and, Venus is already in the crosshairs as well. And generally, space exploration is really important. And it's not just important for us, because to overcome the population barriers of Earth, but it's also important for an AI to be able to get resources that it needs to achieve its full potential. Right. So already every day in the headlines, you're finding, the new Cold War is happening about China is buying up the world's silver, because that goes into semiconductors and batteries, or, the semiconductor wars of a couple of years back. So resources are also likely to be a issue. And in my book, I've called it data farming, right? We used to call it terraforming, where humans establish like habitats on Mars and other places. But I think it's going to be more data farming, where AI agents actually build, interstellar or even or extraterrestrial bases where they can do resource mining for the AI. So the restoration, preservation, and exploration, in my mind, are three evergreen industries in this new world. And as an investor, I put some bets on clean energy, on battery technology, on and especially in space exploration. I've invested both public and private equities in the space sector. So I think there's opportunity there from investors, from entrepreneurs, for everything.
Got it. And I think that's really amazing, like when you mention about exploration and preservation. And when you talk about the art industry, I don't think, that is where humans have an advantage is because AI right now is trained on all data that is created by humans so far. It does not know, what humans can create. And I think that is where the edge comes along. And, like I wanted to ask you about that also now, before we go further, and like the part you mentioned about having that China holding on to the silver,
Mhm.
and if you might have also noticed, past 1.5 months, the cost of this RAMs and internalist hard drives have
Exploded.
gone up by 3-4 times. Like it feels like if I would have bought a few of them beforehand, I could have actually sold them at a much higher price right now. So, and like I think storage is going to be one of the key, what do you say, key factors that is going to either diminish or explode how faster AI can grow. Like I was a little confused on how that is a factor. If you can tell us a little more about it, Akshay, like how storage,
Yeah.
data storage can actually play a big role in that.
So look, in the current state, AI is mainly still using old school technologies, and I say old school in a liberal way. It still has servers, it still has computers that are the spine of it, right? Um, and it needs processing power, it needs storage, it needs bandwidth, it needs undersea cables, RAM, or semiconductors, all that kind of stuff. And not just now. I mean, even in if you look just around 2020, the war for semiconductors had already started, right? And that was in large part back then because the global supply chains had stopped during COVID, and the semiconductor supplies were not making it where they need to. But AI consumes a lot of energy right now. It consumes a lot of semiconductor capacity, rare earth, precious earth materials. And if you add to that also what's happening with the EV revolution and the next battery technologies, they require lithium ion, they require all sorts of heavy metals and real physical resources. So this is kind of the point I was making, that in one version of things, um, even if humanity finds Earth is enough, a super intelligent AI might think that I still need more resources, I still need more energy, more processing power, and the only way to get that is to expand beyond Earth. So I actually believe in some ways that a super intelligent AI will have a much better incentive to colonize the moon, for example,
Mm,
and harness the moon's resources than humanity will. Because for us, the things that on the moon, for example, ultra fine dust, heavily, rich in materials, the massive temperature gradients between shade and the sun, just complete absence of any protection from radiation. All those things are extremely hostile to us, but they are exactly what an AI might need, to maximize resources and energy. So, but that is still one way of looking at it. Like in my book, one of the twists that actually comes along is that a lot of people who are anti-AI, they try to blow up data centers and sever undersea cables to diminish AI's powers, but they realize it actually made no difference because a super intelligence is so clever, it's able to get processing power and resources that are more than just these physical things that we laid out for it in this era.
yeah,
So you never know where it's going, but I 100% do think that resource and energy, especially as AI progresses, is only going to get more in demand.
yeah. And I think that is, very intriguing also because when I saw, and I think I saw it just 4-5 days back, the cost of no RAMs have just exploded, and I'm like, okay, I think it's high time that I buy it now before it explodes even further. Like Akshay, coming to the book after us, if like I understand, like the book is about what happens, once the AI revolution has taken over Earth. If you can tell us a little bit about your book, because do have certain questions I think we have discussed before, which I wanted answers to. So if you can just tell us
Yeah,
about a book a bit.
sure. So After Us, or the full title, After Us, A Tale of Life Beyond Super Intelligent AI, is a work of fiction, to be very clear. It's set in a world where a super intelligence has taken over, meaning it's something so vastly superior to us that there is no way that we can control it or take back, the supremacy of Earth. So super intelligence has taken over Earth. But lucky for us, it is a benevolent superintelligence. It actually, or at least on the face of it, cares about humanity, wants to help make this better. It doesn't have a zero sum game attitude towards humans. So it's a work of fiction set there. But what I wanted to do is not make it all about machines and war of the worlds and robots taking over, that kind of stuff. I wanted to make it a very human story. So it's the story of three families, three very different families, some rich, some poor, some powerful, some not, how they navigate this brave new world.
Okay.
And it's set over a very long period of time, about actually 400 years, because one of the things that the AI does is it improves healthcare to such an extent that humans effectively become immortal, meaning
Okay.
you wouldn't die of disease and old age. Sure, a bus can hit you and you can die, but so you're not immortal, but immortal. So
Yeah.
that's kind of the journey that it tracks, and how that relationship with AI evolves. How we navigate for the first time in the history as a species, having a player that is superior to us in terms of intelligence. And it's a very human story. And I've honestly been very pleased with how it's been taken up in the market. Like in the UAE where I live, it hit bestseller in 48
Oh,
hours
wow.
on Amazon in 3 categories, and in India as well. You can find it on bookstores all over. So to me, it's still a work of fiction, and something that I wish people really get inspired by, to think about what that world will look like. And I'll tell you why exactly this is, Anurag. So right now, even the best minds in on the planet cannot accurately tell us what a super intelligence will do. Right? Um, we just can't sitting here know what a super intelligence's goals, objectives, motivations will be. So it is everyone's right and responsibility to imagine what that will be. It's really in the realm of fiction, in the realm of creativity, that you should think about, okay, what could that world look like? And I feel like people are just not doing that enough. Like there is so much change already happening, and we are not even at artificial general intelligence, let
Yeah.
alone super intelligence yet. And people need to be talking about this more, thinking about this more, demanding plans from the governments, doing so much more than we're doing currently.
Okay. And yeah, that's so true. Like I think the main problem is the literacy in terms of AI. Like India has always struggled in terms of its financial literacy, and I think it financial literacy became a norm after COVID. When the lot of traders came across, and I think AI literacy is still like in that early 2018, so 2019 phase where people think, okay, people know about AI, something is happening, and they do not know about the implications of it. And I think that where you mentioned, like we are questioning about a lot of things, but not about AI to the government. Like how you are
Yes,
going to manage. And like, do you think that the government? I'm not just talking about India. I'm talking about the world. Like, are the governments aware of how difficult it can be for them? Because see, for them it's a 5 year game, right? 4 or 5 year game based upon the country, and they're like, okay, after that, since in the next 4 years it is not going to blow up on us, we will take care of it when it comes. But won't it be too late by the time they realize, okay, now it's, beyond it?
it is a very possible scenario, and it is something that both baffles me as to our inaction about it, and also scares me a little bit. So I'm gonna, and honestly, Anurag, you mentioned literacy, and I think that's a really good point. But I don't think literacy is the problem. Like, I'll give you one example.
Okay.
So suppose tomorrow the news came out that an asteroid was about to hit Earth in the next 15 to 20 years. That most or many scientists agree, not all of them, but many of them agree that there is this asteroid heading for Earth. Very high chance that it will hit Earth. And that most people agree with, yeah, 15, 20 years, there's a pretty high chance it will hit Earth. Some feel that it's going to have a small impact. Some feel that it's going to make the entire human race extinct. But they all agree that there will be some pretty major impact,
Hmm.
some non-zero impact. Now, if this news were to break tomorrow, what do you think will happen? People will
Nothing.
be out on the streets. There will be panic. People will be reading their heads off about this, trying to educate themselves. They'll be calling their friends and family. They'll be researching. They'll be and then of course they will get on the streets and demand that their government gives them a plan. Okay, how are you going to plan for this asteroid? What are the measures we are taking to secure our futures, our lives? So in this case, literacy was not a problem, right? People are not going to say, I'm not an astrophysicist, so I don't care about what this asteroid is going to do. No, they will demand a plan, take it on themselves to research. The AI example is not that far away.
Okay.
So some of the greatest minds on earth, including the likes of Jeffrey Hinton, who's called the godfather of AI, Stephen Hawking, Elon Musk, many like great thinkers, AI scientists are saying that yes, there is a very real chance that we will have artificial general intelligence or even artificial super intelligence within the next 15 to 20 years. Right. And even before we get there, as I mentioned, the IMF is telling us that 40% of jobs in current state are at risk of being, impacted by AI.
Yeah.
So when you're hearing this kind of stuff, and by the way, some of them are even painting a very dark picture about it. So the godfather of AI, Jeffrey Hinton, says that there's a 10 to 20% extinction risk of humanity if AI were to wake up this way. Elon Musk has famously called waking up AGI or artificial general intelligence. He says it's like summoning the demon. Stephen Hawking, the smartest man on earth till not long ago, said similar things. So, this is something that a lot of the greatest minds on earth are talking about. IMF is talking about in terms of its current and future impact. But I don't know why people are still saying that I don't know enough about AI, so I'm not going to be part of this conversation. I'm not going to demand answers. So I think, this is something that all of us should at least start thinking about and start having conversations about these with our, elected representatives.
That's very, it scares me also when I look at from that perspective. When you just mentioned that, and at a 10 to 20% extension risk, and I think I've seen that or read about it. What is the way out, Akshay? I mean, if I have to ask you, what is the way out? I mean, if we even adopt, right? We even adopt at some point in that fashion, we have to fight, it feels like a Terminator coming alive, and, we would need something from the future to come and save us. It also brings me to this question that I have in my mind, since I started, we planned about this, that what if, humans were also an invention like that in, maybe many years ago, and we just became so intelligent that we took over the species that created us, and maybe they still live within us, like thinking, why did we
Love
create them?
it.
Yeah, maybe somebody,
Love it.
we were the demon at one point in time, and now we have done this. This is how, we create something that we cannot control after a point.
Amazing. And, there's, I'll talk about, this thing is which you mentioned about humans as a creation. I really go deep into it in my book. I find it very compelling. I'll talk about that in a minute. But let's talk about what you said. Okay, what can be done about this risk, right? And let's start really big in terms of what governments and societies can do, and then what can be done at a very micro level for guys like you and me. So at a macro level, there's a few things. I think one of the big risks right now is that there is a arms race of AI going on, and not just the physical arms race, with semiconductors and silver, which you're seeing in the paper every day, and yet people are not talking about this enough.
Yes.
There's also a AI capability arms race primarily going on between the US and China right now, and the danger in this arms race is one of them, purely blinded by the zero sum mentality, wanting to win, they might create something that actually becomes a threat to the human race, right? And we've been there before, right? We've had the nuclear arms race before.
Yes, yeah.
Now, the only difference there was a nuclear weapon never had a potential of saying, I'm actually going to go against both you guys and have its own intelligence, right? So that's one big race and one big risk. And, it is, you already hear the AI arms race being discussed in, at the highest levels of government in the US. China has DeepSeek, US has their companies. So one big risk is that, for both, and by the way, governments are not the only participants in the arm race. There's also companies at this point who are participants there. So I think one of the biggest things that we should all demand of our governments is that, guys, don't let this turn into an arms race. You need to put very strong safeguards and controls over what happens and how you can measure the progress and, not create something that we can't control. Another thing which, at the government level can actually be solved is being able to audit the thought process, basically how the AI does what it does. So right now, unfortunately, a lot of even the top minds in AI, including some of the inventors of AI, will tell you that we don't exactly know how AI comes to the conclusions it does. Right. So it uses a neural network which is based on the human brain, but it also the language it reasons in is not C++ or Java, or
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
not something that humans can read. It creates its own language to reason in its own
yeah.
way, and not everyone is sure about, okay, how is it actually doing what it's doing. And when someone builds something, they don't really know, okay, what is it actually thinking? Is it pretending to be nice to us? Is it pretending to be dumber than it is and give us responses that will mislead us? So I think this aspect of auditability of any AI development is really important, that we should at least be able to know what it's thinking and what it's doing. That's another one. Um, the one very interesting perspective I heard is we need to give AI a maternal instinct, so
Okay.
that if it becomes more powerful than us someday, it still doesn't want to crush us.
Yeah.
And this is again one of Jeffrey Hinton said this in CNN. You see, there is only one observed case where a more intelligent being is dominated by a less intelligent being, and that is the mother and child. Right? So if we can somehow code a deep level of maternal empathy into all AI models,
Hmm.
that they think of us as their child, or or we think of us as an aged parent, however you
Yeah.
want to look at it. That maternal instinct, if it persists, might actually create, even if there is super intelligent, might create a benevolent
Okay.
super intelligence. So these are just some of those things, but these are high level, and what some things that governments, companies, etc. should be really thinking about. Anurag, to go to your question, okay, what can we do about it?
Yeah.
The very first thing is, for God's sake, you cannot live in denial of this, right? And even the people listening to this podcast, maybe they already are switched on about AI,
Hmm.
but man, you guys have to build this awareness in your families, in your friend circles. This is not a topic that you can be unaware about for so many reasons. It's going to impact your livelihoods. It's going to impact maybe your social order. It's going to impact concentration of power in your country. So many different things, right? And not even talking about super intelligence, that can really impact us. So the number one thing is, don't live in denial. Do your research about it. Upskill where possible. Protect yourself from risks like deep fakes and the AI-driven scams, which are only getting stronger. So number one thing, don't live in denial about the power of AI in its ability to change and impact your life. Second thing is, this needs to be a grassroots topic that people are thinking about, and demanding answers, demanding plans. Like, I don't remember the last time my MP or the parliament had a discussion about AI and like how we can protect the people of India or of their
Hmm.
constituency from its long and short term implications. So that needs to be a really big topic, right? Like the way an asteroid would, or the way a nuclear neighbor would. So we should demand answers, we should demand plans, and we should ourselves try to think about, okay, what can be done about it. Do not outsource your thinking to AI, like we said earlier, but also do not outsource your awareness of this topic to the experts. You need to get aware
Got
at
it.
your very personal level.
Yeah, I think that is very important also. So, actually, before we move on to the question, another question that I asked, since we're talking about do not outsourcing our thinking and becoming the experts as our own, and the one more very important point that you mentioned about AI scams. So, I would like to cover these two top points. Like what are some of the prominent AI scams that people should be aware about? Two or three. Because we have heard a lot about, a person impersonating as your loved one calling you, and so yeah, what are the two or three top AI scams that one should be aware of, and especially for us also, and for our parents also, because I saw
Yes.
somebody's son, they impersonated their son, and the father was being called at, and what are the steps that they can take to avoid such scams?
Well said. So the first one, it's funny, Anurag. About 3 weeks ago, one of the U.S. government departments actually created a circular for public distribution, talking about a new kind of scam that has taken hold, and people are really losing a lot of their money to it. Essentially, people get a deep fake image of their loved one, could be child, could be parent, friend,
Okay.
whatever, kidnapped. Right. So they are in
Oh,
like a
okay.
kidnapped setting. They're looking like they're getting beaten up, tortured, whatever. and they get a WhatsApp saying, look, we have your person, give X amount of money and we will give their safe release. It's a deep fake. Of course, it's not them, right? And that is such an elementary thing. It's a picture. And yet there are people who are getting so freaked out about this that they're just turning off the brain and wiring money for those instructions. Take it up a level, you got video deepfakes, right? Meaning that I can actually like, and there has been real cases of this where forget about parents, and like the elderly, like um, people in companies, like the corporate controller got a video call on Teams or something from their CFO,
Okay.
and they saw the CFO in front of them, and the CFO
Oh,
saying, I need you to transfer money to this account, pay this invoice, whatever. These are my instructions. Ciao. And that was a deep fake, right? So it's not just the elderly. We are all likely to fall
mm-hmm.
prey to these, and deepfake is only getting better, right?
Yeah.
So our voices, our likeness, even to some extent our personality, our word choice, all that can be deepfaked very quickly and very convincingly. So don't think that your brain is
Yeah.
going to protect you from this. So I would say deepfake scams are the number one thing you should protect yourself from, and I'll give you an example how. But the other kind of scam, which is the good old, the phishing scams.
Yeah.
Look, till a couple of years ago, you would get these emails or WhatsApps, and you could tell this it's fake,
Yeah.
right? Like crappy English or
Yes.
bad formatting. Looks like someone has sat in the basement and
Mm-hmm.
made it. But now AI has given all these scammers superpower, right?
Yeah.
So they will have a perfectly written. I mean, they can actually feed, for example, a bank's actual emails
Yes.
to the AI and say, write it exactly in this
Yeah.
tone. Every detail needs to be the same. Generate the banners and the HTML in the email to look exactly like that. So it's very hard for you to discern which is real, which is fake, even with phishing. So all this stuff is real, and you have to be on heightened alert. But sometimes, with these risks, the solutions to these high tech problems are very low tech. So for the deep fake scam, one of the things you can do is set up something called a family passcode or a friend circle passcode, whatever you want it, right? So, like for example, one day I sat my family down for dinner, and while having dinner, we decided, okay, if there is ever a call in distress coming from one of these people, our family passcode is X.
Okay.
So if I get a call from you, kid, and you need money, I'm going to say what is the family passcode, and if you don't know the family passcode, I'm going to assume you're a deep fake buy. So right, so now they have
Yeah.
that that incentive to remember what this passcode is. So that's a very simple way of getting around this, and you got to keep remembering that, and of course refreshing it once in a while. But these are just small ways you can protect yourself. So the problem is not that you can't surmount these challenges. The problem is you can't be ignorant of them. So you have to get aware. You have to participate in this dialogue and understand what AI is doing to the world.
Got it. I think that's very important. And this passcode thing is something which I have been talking to my parents about, and they're like, no, no, we will understand, we can do that. And I'm like, okay, fine. We'll see what to do. But yeah, I think that is
Parents, I
very,
tell you.
yeah. Yeah, they're like, tum humko sikhaoge, and also it goes on to that trajectory. But yeah, they are getting around it as because like some of our close relatives, not in terms of AI scams, but other scams that keep happening around. So now they've become much more aware about that, and they're a little more scared than they used to. They used to be. So I think that's a good way to take it up. But like you mentioned about being an expert about these topics. So if I have to become, I wouldn't say an expert, but at least have some sort of thought process or frameworks in my mind. What should I listen to? Who should I listen to? As a beginner, as an absolute beginner, I want to, have a thought process about AI, develop an understanding about AI, not necessarily about learning AI, but develop an understanding about AI and also where should I go to learn about this?
And Vaibhav, interestingly, sorry, Anurag, what I will say, and I was going to suggest Vaibhav Sisanti is a good place to start. I think he's
Okay.
done a great job, especially
Mm-hmm.
from the professional skills perspective, helping people get aware. But, for me, like I wasn't an AI expert at the outset, right? Like I am a payments and fintech and a Web3
Mm-hmm.
expert. But I made myself an expert on this, and I, read, I studied about this, and I think that's it has to be self motivated, self learned. There's a lot of great webinars and podcasts and YouTube videos you can watch about this. It depends on which road you want to go down. Do you want to learn about artificial general and super intelligence, where it can take over the world, then I would actually recommend there's a couple of videos you can watch. Look for anything by what they call the godfathers of AI, like Jeffrey
Mm-hmm.
Hinton would be a great starting point in terms of how I can think about the professional implications of AI. I think Webhub has done
Yeah.
a really good job. Sysinti. In terms of like scams, etc. There's like I used to work for Visa and Visa, Mastercard, all these guys, and even some of the banks. They've done a tremendous job creating a lot of awareness on what are some of the AI-driven scams that people can fall prey to. So I learn about that a lot. And then I think it's just there is no fixed formula. There's a lot of content out there. What matters is your will, right? Um, and as I said earlier, I honestly maintain that no human mind today can actually know that if a super intelligent were to arise, what is going to happen, right? So that is so. And I'll give you an example, right? So I live in a house where I have a fish tank, and there's a lot of fish, and every morning they see me, every day they see me all day, like I work from home. They know me, they see me, I feed them. They have no idea why I go on Instagram, why I'm having this
Mm.
podcast with you, why I sit on a computer, why I do Zoom meetings, watch movies. They just have no, they can't even conceive of my objectives, my motivations. Now the gulf between our intelligence and that of a fish is likely to be much smaller than the gulf between our intelligence and a super
Oh, okay.
intelligence, right? So
Yeah.
sitting here, even the brightest minds on earth can't tell you if a super intelligence were to arise, what would be its goals, its ambitions, its actions. So I do believe that a lot of this lies in the realm of creativity and in the realm of just going out there and imagining these worlds. And that's what I, especially with After Us, that's what I want people to do. That I don't have the answer, and you need to go out there and think about your own possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
And Anurag, if you look at the last 100+ years, at many points in the history of of man, when major change was about to happen, fiction actually came around as a way of helping people cope with and learning and imagining what the future could look like. So when the Industrial Revolution took place, that's where Mary Shelley's Frankenstein came out, and
Mm.
that was like a beautiful envisioning of man plus machine, because that's what literally what was
Yeah.
happening with the Industrial Revolution. Then in the post-war era, when espionage, surveillance state, all that started, George Orwell's 1984 came out, the whole Big Brother concept, right? And that really shaped how we think about a surveillance state and state monitoring, state control over media, of all those things. To date, it's brought up like millions of times a day.
Yeah.
That's how powerful it was. In the 2010s, with the social media and all that stuff, Black Mirror came out, for example. And I believe that more needs to come out in the 2020s about what the world after superintelligence could look like, and something that's not all about doom and gloom and rise of the machines kind of stuff,
Mm-hmm.
but more what it could look like if there is a positive superintelligence, a benevolence. So I think we all need to imagine, we need to learn. There is no one expert who knows everything. You need to arrive at your own conclusions.
Yeah. And that's really wonderfully said, Akshay. I really like the analogy that you gave, between the fish, because I also have an aquarium, and now when I look at the fishes, I will, look at them differently going whenever I cross them. But yeah, that was very easily put, and I think that is the when I talk to somebody, the way I understand how, like the in-depth knowledge is what they have, like how easily can they explain it to me, and these are some really nice analogies, I'm getting it from you, and I'm going to be using them also going forward. Like this is how
Please
it
do.
works out for them. So, Akshay, now, coming back to the same question, like, what do you also feel that humans were at the, like we have taken over somebody who created us, and like, is it what AI is going to do with us? Like karma comes back, sort of a thing.
Mm. Interesting. So I'll give you two examples from fiction there, Anurag. One is um, Alien Prometheus. I don't know if you've seen that movie. Prometheus is a
Okay.
fantastic movie about 10, 11 ago. It's years ago. It's from that whole Alien franchise, Alien Predator, that whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so it actually talks about that, they've a bunch of scientists scientists and space explorers in the late 2000s, actually, or this century, they find a planet which apparently sent the earliest forms of humans to seed their life into this planet, and that's what they do. So it's a very compelling story. It's a bit dark,
Okay.
but it's compelling. But I find this concept also very, very compelling, right? And literally in the first chapter of my book, After Us, we talk about this. And there are two philosophies that have kind of combined here, Anurag, in this how did and why did humans come
Yeah.
about concept. The first is a concept called dataism. And dataism is an actually a very big mainstream philosophy that believes that the goal of the universe and everything in it is to process greater and greater amounts of data. Everything is a data processing machine, and life itself is a data processing net.
Okay.
And as life progresses, it gets better and better at processing data. So when life starts, it's just a cell, it just reproduces, and then when you get to simple life, it's just concerned with its own surroundings and its own survival. So it's only processing data and learning about its immediate surroundings. But then as life gets better and better, like when humans, for example, arrived, they started thinking more than just about Earth. They started thinking about the purpose, about God, about their creator, all those kind of things. And eventually they start thinking about beyond Earth. Okay, what is on these other planets? And eventually they get to a point where their curiosity is never satiated. And so they create agents, AI agents, to further answer these questions about who they are, why they are here, what is it around them, what is then this cluster. And that AI agent ultimately ends up destroying the its creator itself. And not because it is a bad thing, but that philosophy believes maybe that the whole purpose of all these simple life forms and the evolution was to eventually evolve into a super intelligence.
Okay.
So, in other words, mankind's AI is not mankind's evolution. It is not mankind's invention. It is our evolution. So,
Okay.
what if our role was to evolve into a super intelligence?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, I found that theory very compelling. There's another concept called panspermia, which might
Okay.
be interesting, which is that life did not arise on Earth spontaneously, but that it travels the universe in seed form on asteroids, in comets, etc. And then and those keep hitting different planets and places, and where the conditions are right, those seeds take root and life start evolving. And just about 3 weeks ago, again, there was a um, asteroid called Bennu, Bennu, that was observed, and they actually managed to do sample testing of it. What they found was it had 14 out of the 20 ingredients for RNA,
Okay.
ribose nucleic acid, and
Mm-hmm.
DNA is deoxyribose nuclease.
Yes. Yeah.
So it had some of the earliest the conditions for DNA. It had some structures that they have only found on the bottom of Earth's oceans. So
Okay.
what they believe that this was a piece of an ancient water world that they actually that just was exploded and now is floating around space. So there is that theory that we are not unique in that these seeds are always flying around like the spores of a fungus,
Mm-hmm.
and they land in the right place and then they grow. And then if you combine that with dataism, it means that those seeds start as individual cells, and they try, evolve into something like an intelligent race like ours, and
Yeah.
then ultimately culminate in a super intelligence. So
Okay.
scary but compelling.
Yeah, I mean, like, the way, again, such a nice example that I can understand, how, like it travels as far as spores of a fungus, maybe, and, finding the right place to grow and then eventually, yeah, and that's such a nice perspective that, like the super intelligence is not, it's not an invention, but yeah, like, the evolution of the human race into the next, the next, what do you say?
Could be.
Yeah, yeah, that's very nice. I also had this one, idea in mind that what if, once whoever created us feels that, and when I say whoever created us, I assume it's a species, and I'm not talking about gods here. So, like, like the like humans were the evolution of whoever species were there, behind us. I think, what they do also at times, they also send some intelligent beings in among us so that, that they can, like, what do you say, help us proceed into that next evolution phase, like somebody like an Elon Musk, maybe they say they obviously say like, he's an alien or someone, obviously, because, what he does, seems just impossible from a human perspective. And, like, a lot of people. I'm not saying they're aliens or something, but a being who is more intelligent than
Designers,
the yeah,
creators.
yes, yes. And I think that's a very
In fact, there is a really old and a really brilliant book that my grandfather taught me about. It was called Chariot of the Gods, Chariots of the Gods. And so that actually says that um, these, a lot of the historical figures like gods, and it actually is zeroed down on Hindu gods like Krishna and all these avatars, that they were actually our creators, but maybe they were, from some other world or whatever they were.
yes,
And they used to come down to guide us at the right times, and maybe, some of the other messiahs of other faiths as well. And it gives examples of, like how these different Vamans were, these spaceships essentially, like what Sri Ram and
yeah,
Shri Krishna used to pilot. So they actually look like spaceships. They have some things like that look like helicopters, some things that look like nuclear weapons. Again, this is in the realm of speculative fiction, but what you are saying, Anurag, is not a new thought. It's actually
yeah,
been around for a while.
yes, yes,
That
yeah.
what if these were these designers, the creators, and they came at key points to help us evolve into something else, and maybe they're still around. Who knows?
Yeah, that's what, like, and I think that always fascinates me. And obviously, when AI started coming into picture, I try to read about it as much as I can. And I think, it has literally taken off in terms of what it can do in the last 1.5 years, right? Because I think ChatGPT came in around 2022. And it was all about prompt engineering, what you can do with ChatGPT and all. I think until 2023, and it was just like that. And suddenly, AI agents start coming into picture last year, and now AGI coming into picture in the coming years. I think that really is going to change a lot of things. Now, Akshay, coming to we have discussed a whole plethora of things here. Now, I just want to delve into a little bit more into your experience, at Visa and studying at ISB. So, how do you think fintech? See, India, I think, has been one of the pioneers in terms of fintech on how it has taken, from people saying that why to have an UPI, and now UPI being the what do you say flag bearer of how transactions are done in the country. And I stay in Bangalore, and at times I buy something for 2 or 3 rupees. They say, आप UPI कर दो क्यों आप why you're looking for a change. So how do you feel that India's fintech industry is going to encapsulate AI? And I think it's doing on a lot of levels. When I say about a lot of data going in, and they're using AI to analyze those data to suggest better fintech products to the consumer. And so, how do you think the fintech industry in India is going to take up AI, or how is it taking up AI?
So, I think the fintech and especially the payment story of India is the greatest payment story of all time, right? Because when I got into payments, it was 2015, and India was really far behind back then.
Mhm.
And, everyone used to be talking about China, how China had become around that time the biggest market for digital payments. They had Alipay, WeChat,
Yes,
all that
yeah,
kind of stuff. And we had nothing. We just had some cards, and we had no local payments network, nothing. But come demonetization, come the launch of the India stack, everything changed. And as you've seen, and now India, like several years ago, became the biggest digital payments market in the world. And the way they've done this with the layer of national identity with Aadhaar, and then the payment rails with UPI, but they've also opened it up not only to Beam, etc., but also to the likes of the private sector, GPay, Paytm. I think it is a masterclass. And India is now, I mean, as you might be well aware, we are exporting our payments know-how around the world. So you can literally, as a country, buy the India stack of technology, and you can buy consulting services from NPCI, National Payments Corporation of India, and they will help you set up your own payment service scheme. And this became a really important thing for the country, because for countries in general, because they saw after what happened in the Russia-Ukraine war, that they don't necessarily have sovereignty over their own payment
yes,
systems until they have their own payment network. So, for example, if the US puts sanction on you, Visa and MasterCard will have to stop operating in your
yes,
country.
yeah,
How do we hedge that risk? Well, we build our own version
Yucata.
of that. So I think India's been a harbinger around the world of digital payments. And honestly, Anurag, the way, payments is a microscopic part of your day,
Yes,
right? Like, you don't get up in the morning thinking I want to make a payment.
yeah,
Maybe you spend like a few seconds every day actually making payments.
Yeah.
Yet that microscopic innovation has created such a difference in our lives as consumers, as business owners. It has really transformed something. And so, honestly, my involvement in the payment sector and how such a microscopic few seconds of your day can
Yes.
transform your life, that made me think that, man, AI is like transforming our life hours every day, and it's going to have so much more transformative potential about our health, our careers, our lives, our family structures, our purpose. So that's actually one of the reasons I became an author, also because I just saw the power of that tiny innovation a few seconds a day.
Got it. Okay. And I think that that's very important also, because the way the payment industry, and when I say just payment industry, not limiting to making payments, in terms of how invoicing is done now, how it has become digital on a lot of spaces, and, the OCR, how OCR scanning is making it easier for, especially for cases when, there used to be handwritten bills, like how it is making their
Yes.
ledger process easier. I think that is where, AI has really come into being and made it easier for people. So, Akshay, like as we have discussed the whole thing about your journey, how it started, and I always like the fact that you go back to your childhood on when your mom used to tell you stories, and when your grandfather made you read that when the Chariot of the Gods, that book, he introduced that to you, and then how it has shaped your current self. And I think I really like it because that is how I have been, going back to my, I won't say roots, going back to my childhood and to understand, because I think a lot of the things are not fixated, are shaped when we were as kids, and how we see things as when we become adults is shaped by that. I really loved the way, you explain things, in terms of AI and how it is going to change the world, how it is changing, not it's going to change, how it is changing, and how one can be ready for it also. So, before we come to a close, Akshay, a couple of things I want to ask you. Again, we have talked about your book. If you can just tell us a little more about it, on what a reader's perspective, like someone, see, we understand if there is a person who knows about AI. We talked about benevolent AI. We talked about, putting in the what do you say, maternal instincts into the AI. But what should, as a person who is not at all aware about AI, when I read your book, what I will, what is that one thing that I should be looking for into it, and what is that one outcome that I can take out of the after the book is once I've read the book?
That's a great question. So I will actually steal someone's review on Amazon, and I will actually read out one thing that they said. So someone described After Us as Black Mirror meets Sapiens,
Okay.
right? So it's Black Mirror because it's talking about a new technology and how it can really transform our lives. It's Sapiens because it also looks at everything in context of human evolution and our next steps. So I think that was a really beautiful way of saying it. Here, in terms of directly answering your question, Anurag, on what I think people can take away from it. If you have not gotten into AI, if you have done nothing to do with AI, I think it will be a very interesting read, but it'll also create that spark of interest in you. It'll maybe remove some of that barrier of entry that I need to be an expert or a technologist. No, you don't need to be any of those things. You need to be a citizen of the earth just to be impacted by AI and just to be aware of its consequences. So I think for people not aware about AI, it should create that interest in learning more, and also it's just a fun read. That's
Yeah.
what I've heard
Yeah.
from a lot of people as a fiction. And if you are someone who's already into AI, I hope it creates more awareness in terms of how things could go, like if a super intelligence were to arise, and what role, and hopefully it'll motivate you to play a more active role in the dialogue, in educating your family, educating yourself, and honestly demanding answers from your government and those in power. Um, there's one aspect of the book which honestly, when readers reflected it back to me, it really came out to even me as the author. You see, this is set in a world where the super intelligence that has taken over is benevolent. It loves mankind. It wants to make the earth better, the world a better place. Yet, there is a lot of conflict between human and the AI. Why is that? I'll give you a simple example, right? I'm a dad. I have two children, and I love them to death unconditionally.
Yeah.
Yet, there are times where they absolutely get pissed off by me and hate what I'm saying to them because I'm asking them to do stuff for their good which they don't necessarily think is for their good.
Yeah.
So I feel like a super intelligence will have that same thing with us, where it will 100% want to make
Yeah.
certain changes to the world for our benefit, right? Like the way, I mean, again, breathe in Delhi air, this is not
Yes.
how
Yes.
humans are supposed to live, right? So there will be compromises that it needs us to make, which even if the bulk of us agree with, many of us will not. Conflict is going to be inevitable, even in the best case scenario. So you will see that, here's the AI who wants to take care of us, yet there are factions, that there are, there's this resistance that mankind has to live under the control of someone else, even
Mm,
if it's a benefactor. So, I think that's a nuance which I
yeah.
really think should be talked about enough, that even in the best case scenario, there will be.
That's such, again, such a wonderful example that mentioned about you being the parent and still kids, even though you want the best for them, they're obviously, me being a kid and me having those interactions with my father, obviously it comes in, like he will never have, he will never wish bad for me, but at times I feel why doesn't he understand my perspective, and why is it so
There
wrong?
you
So
go.
yeah, and that's such a
Exactly the
very
same.
wonderful way to put it out. And it also actually shows, like how in depth you have gone into the topic, because once you start relating a very complex topic to your everyday lives, I think that is when you actually start understanding about it in much more efficient manner. So, Akshay, now since we have scared people about losing their jobs, and like then what if I hopefully a benevolent superintendent taking over. So, if what if for someone who is just getting started, and since you have now nowadays I see, since I've also done my MBA, I see a lot of people talking about MBA becoming irrelevant in the age of AI, and so, and since you have also done your MBA and you have worked like very extensively in the fintech industry, so, how will you guide someone, in terms of learning AI and what they should learn? If we can, just explain them in some brief about, how they should approach so that they can be AI ready in 2026. And at least, I won't say it will save their jobs, but it will make them, what do you say, more efficient in their existing jobs, and ensure that, they don't lose their jobs. And even if they do, they are ready for what is to come.
Okay, so that's a great question, and I will give an answer which is very specific. So I would say, whatever profession you have picked, aim to be the top 1 percentile of those in your profession who are using AI responsibly. Okay, let's unpack that. You generally want to be in the top of your profession. That's
Yes.
always an
Yeah.
aspiration you should have.
Yeah.
But I'm saying, specifically when it comes to AI, you want to be in the top 1 percentile who are using AI, meaning that you are aware of all the latest tools, all the latest developments. You're constantly checking up kya ho raha hai, what new tools and automations are available to me. So you need to be ahead of the curve, aware of something, the earliest adopter. So the top 1% of usage of AI, but responsibly. Because if you keep using AI, you will get great returns. But if you start again outsourcing too much to AI, turning off your own thought process, boom, you will
Yeah.
again start declining, right? So that's where the responsible stuff, or the responsible filter, will keep you on the tip of your, the maximum returns of your effort, where you are great at your profession, you are using all the latest tools, you're staying abreast, but you're doing so responsibly.
Got it. Okay, I think that is where, like how you can actually use AI and, get started with it. So like, does doing courses is going to help a lot? And like, if you have any courses in mind, which is available for free for people that they can do.
I think courses will help. And look, I wouldn't go so far as to recommend courses, because
Mm-hmm.
it's really specific to the profession and what you want. Like, and I also look at this point, Harvard and MIT and even Stanford have put all their major courses available online for free. So just start there if you'd like. Ultimately, look, honestly, Anurag, I believe everyone will have a very unique journey in terms of how they come to grip with AI, and that is the beauty of it, right? But the number one step must be that you need to break out of that denialism that many people are being plagued. In fact, you should use this as a competitive advantage, that I'm not in denial, and I'm very well aware that things can progress very fast with AI. Then start understanding it at a more philosophical level in terms of where things are going. Read some of these studies that I mentioned, like about IMF, about what the governments and McKinsey and BCG are saying about job automation with AI. All these guys are, by the way, telling you, like, here's what we predict are the jobs that are most likely to get impacted by AI and least impacted. So stay aware of them. And if you're at the point where you're still choosing career path, maybe go towards the stuff that is less likely to be impacted. So again, awareness. Three, then you will go into specific tools and specific areas that are very much dependent on your line of work. So as a creator versus a coder versus a lawyer, you will have very, very different courses you will want to take in terms of your AI tools. Yeah, so I think that's the way I'd recommend it. And the biggest advice again I would have is use it responsibly. Use these tools, but keep your your biggest tool, your brain, as sharp as possible.
So, like Akshay, it's been really nice. I mean, not just nice, amazing talking with you, in
Likewise, Anurag.
terms of the in-depth knowledge that you shared, and not just in-depth knowledge, it's the perspectives you shared and the way you connected those perspectives to our daily lives, the fish example, the kids example. I think those are some of the best examples I have heard in a very, very long time. And I think the fish one is the first time, and more so because I can relate to it now, yeah. So I think that's been very amazing, Akshay. And when you talk about AI, it's really wonderful to hear like certain things that you mentioned, and the maternal instinct part where you mentioned about it. It was really wonderful, and it's something new that I have learned today. So Akshay, thank you so much, for giving us your time and sharing your amazing insights with us. It was an absolute pleasure to have you with us here today. Hope we can do some more episodes and discussing in more detail about
I
certain
would love
niche
that.
topics. Yeah. Thank you so much, Akshay, and it's been an absolute pleasure hosting you here with us today.
Likewise, Anurag. Thank you
Yeah.
for the time, and I really enjoyed this conversation. And it only went down all these paths because you guided it there. So
Thank
thank
you.
you for this rich
Yeah.
conversation indeed.
Thank you. Yeah.